both in helping the face and jaws to grow properly, which happens when muscles work correctly and push and pull on bones correctly in children, which basically is correct swallowing and breathing patterns. That helps the face and jaws to grow properly so that then the teeth don't come through crooked and they have enough room. So I've been involved a lot in that. And also in my main work these days, up until very recently, when I actually recently had to stop work because of all of the mandates and so on, was in relation to, I was doing a laser surgery mostly on infants who are born with a congenital tongue or lip, which affects how they learn to, how they're able to feed, both at the breast or at the bottle. You know, feeding is really what sets up the correct swallowing and breathing pattern for the infant. So
Dan, my friend, it's so
hey,
good to see you. And thank you so much for making some time to have a little chat with me today.
yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me on. It's good to see your face and looking forward to seeing you in person again soon.
Won't be too long. Thinking of how to introduce you, you wear many hats in life and also play many roles in mine, being a friend, a mentor, a teacher, a student. And it's just a relationship that has given me so many gifts. And hopefully we'll get to share a few stories about how it's all come to be. But you have a very extensive background in the world of dentistry, but also holistic and functional dentistry, and later moving on into becoming a breathing expert and lecturing around the world and talking to people about, breathing, but also the jaws and airways and different areas. And I think I might leave it at that. And maybe you can share also with where you are today, maybe there's a bit of an evolved version of that already. So when people ask you like what you do, like what your profession is, right? Or what your career has sort of amounted to, how do you explain that?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard to do it in a short time. These days, I mean, since 2011, I haven't drilled a tooth or cleaned a gum or anything like that. So when people talk about dentists, they usually think about teeth and gums. And since 2011, I've been involved from a dental career point of view, in both in helping the face and jaws to grow properly, which happens when muscles work correctly and push and pull on bones correctly in children, which basically is correct swallowing and breathing patterns. That helps the face and jaws to grow properly so that then the teeth don't come through crooked and they have enough room. So I've been involved a lot in that. And also in my main work these days, up until very recently, when I actually recently had to stop work because of all of the mandates and so on, was in relation to, I was doing a laser surgery mostly on infants who are born with a congenital tongue or lip defect, which affects how they learn to, how they're able to feed, both at the breast or at the bottle. And, feeding is really what sets up the correct swallowing and breathing pattern for the infant. So that's kind of how my dental work is still very involved in the breath, because if an infant doesn't learn to feed properly, they don't learn to breathe properly.
Yeah.
And so that's the dental side of it. And then there's the other side of it, which is the breath and then the men's work and all those other sorts of things that I'm involved in.
Yeah. And that's really the side that we connected on originally, but since meeting you, you've pulled me down into the rabbit hole, and you've shown me just a hidden epidemic sometimes is what it's related to, and that's the epidemic of jaws and the way that human structure and the bodies that we live in really us growing and forming correctly is not something that we can take for granted, to put it in simple terms. And the really interesting thing about it is that, we live in a world that's breathless, right? In the worst of ways. So that stress is higher than ever. Anxiety is higher than ever. There's a lot of screens. There's a lot of pressures in the modern world, essentially. And it weighs us down in so many different ways. And one of the big things that it affects is our breathing, right? And so I don't know the exact number today, but each study that kind of comes out and each reference that I pull up, it's more and more disturbing, right? From things like study in Brazil, it said that 53% of children are now mouth breathers. People that you and I look up to in the space of functional dentistry are saying that I think 40% of people are taking orthodontic sort of intervention, but even more will need it, right? So even more have like a jaw that's not shaped the way that man was designed to be shaped, right? And so these numbers are really, really high. And I think most people that they're not aware of this, and that's kind of why it's a hidden epidemic. It's not something that's being talked about or even being looked at or even being considered, right? And what's quite interesting, so maybe we can start with dentistry, because that's where I guess your story kind of began, and I'm quite curious to hear like from your perspective how that evolved. But the dentists are kind of the front line, or I should really say they're supposed to be the front line when it comes to people's breathing and when it comes to people's faces and really their airway health, right? Because I mean, they're the ones that are looking at this problem like evolving before their very eyes, like day in, day out. Yet most dentists I mean, they certainly don't speak to this. They certainly don't look at alternative. The fact that we even call it alternative is a little bit odd, but alternative measures. So things, not things like just drilling into teeth consistently and just kind of masking the underlying issues, not looking at the root causes, for a bit of a wordplay there, of what really causes teeth not to grow correctly, and what really causes jaws not to shape the right way, and also what then trickles down into breathing, which we might come back to a little bit later. So as a dentist, and also, I don't think we've ever really spoken about this, but when you go to like dentist school, at the university, what's the general thesis on this? Like, why do people believe that, everyone has poor dental health?
Yeah, it's a big can of worms, that one. Basically, when we're in dental school, we, like doctors and most other health professionals who go to university, we sort of learn like a reactionary approach to healthcare, or allopathic. There's a problem here, give this drug, or rather than look at why the problem was there in the first place. And so we learn a little bit about how to move teeth around, which is what orthodontics means, is sort of moving teeth through the bone. So we learn how to sort of fix the problem, or make it look like the problem's not there, or at least make it look nice. But we don't get a great deal on. We did get a little bit on like soft tissues can have an impact, but that was sort of skirted over. And so most dentists haven't had this education. One of the lecture things that I lecture on around the world is teaching dentists and orthodontists not only how to see this problem, but also then how to deal with it. And that sort of is a bit of an inroad into how you asked before about how I kind of came across it. And the reality was, I in about 2008 started treating children very, very early on with expanding their jaws with like little plates that most people have seen before to help the jaw expand. And I was thinking I was doing this amazing work, but these kids were coming back to me 6 months later for their normal check, and I was seeing that they'd relapsed. And I wasn't.
Right.
And then this is why many traditional dentists or orthodontists, they don't like this idea of early treatment, because they see that it relapses. And I wasn't happy that I'd charged all of this money for these people. And maybe 70% of cases, I was seeing a lot of relapse that I wasn't happy with. And then one day I was actually working on this. She was about 25 years old, this woman. And I was also expanding her jaw and before putting braces on to straighten her teeth. And she came in with this brochure and said, "Can I have this instead of the appliance that you've given me?" And
Oh, wow.
what she was talking about was a myofunctional appliance. It was actually what's now known as a myobrace, but it was an appliance that you put in the mouth, which helps people to learn to keep their mouth closed, keep the tongue in the roof of the mouth, and helps them to change the way they learn to swallow. And I just looked at this thing, and it's an off the shelf thing. It comes in like 3 or 4 different sizes. It's off the shelf, and I'd made this bespoke appliance that was made specifically for this woman, and I'd be using all these fancy measurements to work out what to do and so on. And here's this off the shelf thing, and I just said, "Oh no, that wouldn't work for you." And I actually put it in the bin, not like in an aggressive way, but I sort of went, "No, that's not for you." And then afterwards, I had this like really weird feeling in my gut, and I was like, "Can't believe I don't even know what that is," and I just threw that in the bin. And I got it out the bin, and I read through it, and I realized the guy who'd invented that product lived about 45 minutes from where I was on the Gold. He's Northern Gold Coast, and he's worth millions of dollars and sells these appliances in over 100 countries worldwide. And I approached him, and I actually ended up working for him, and he ended up getting me to lecture to teach on how to do this eventually. But I approached him and realized that the reason why all these cases were relapsing is because the soft tissues weren't in the right position. So the tongue needs to be in the roof of the mouth, which is linked with nose breathing. And when we swallow, we need to have no contraction of these muscles around here. Basically, extra oral muscles should not contract, apart from a bit of movement down here, you'll see. And if that happens, then the teeth are not pushed on by the muscles in the wrong way, and the tongue sits up in the roof of the mouth to help the jaw to grow properly, and helps the jaw to make space for the tongue, and then the jaw moves forwards away from the airway, which sits directly behind the jaw and behind the tongue. Whereas if the whole time the kid's mouth breathing, which you were talking about before, this whole mouth breathing problem, the kid's kind of like this. If you're mouth breathing, you have to have the tongue low in the mouth. Try and breathe. If anyone's listening to this now, try and breathe through your mouth with your tongue in the roof of your mouth. You can't.
Yeah.
Your tongue blocks it. So nose breathing, tongue in the roof of the mouth helps the jaw to grow. And then if we swallow correctly, which is set up from breastfeeding, if we swallow correctly, then no movement of these muscles. So we're not getting this. I basically say the muscles are like a sculptor, and the teeth and jaws are like a big lump of clay in a growing child. That's how I explain it to parents. And I say, so the sculptor's got to be working properly. These muscles have got to be out the way, and the tongue's got to be doing its thing and helping to shape the jaw. And the breath is related to that. So that was how it all started for me. It was this kind of like, I can't believe I threw that thing in the bin. And it turned out that it wouldn't have been appropriate thing for this adult. She was far too late in her growth. You need to do these things on younger kids to get the results while they're growing. But I was like, I can't believe I just threw that away. I need to work out what that is. And that was the pathway, you know. And that then led me to learn about breathing, because one of my mentors in that technique said to me, if we're going to work together, you need to know more about breathing. And I said to him, I said, why? Like, what's that got to do with anything? And then I went on a 2-day course by an amazing man called Dr. John Flutter, who's now moved back to London. And, you know, he introduced me to this Buteyko world. And then I went to a Buteyko seminar, just a nighttime basic seminar, like just a free info session. I was still super skeptical. And then
Right.
basically went and did it for my own health. And at that time I had serious sleep apnea. And as a dentist, we're told to make the jaws bigger and bring the jaw forwards to open up the airway. And I tried all of that and it hadn't helped me. And I went and did this Buteyko thing, and my life changed from that moment.
I want to come back to that because it is actually an incredible story. And I love how, like, thanks for your openness and sharing all of this, because, you know, really what kind of comes through to me is what speaks to your willingness and your willingness to be open-minded and to try something different, right? But also the moment of throwing the device in the bin, like it really speaks to this allopathic model of medicine where it's like, well, if I don't know it, then it's nonsense. It's nonsensical. And it's fascinating to me that, you know, someone would dare think out of the box, like, as you said, through a little bit of a gut reaction, and then the completely different trajectory that could take.
Yeah.
And also, you know, from like another perspective, it actually opened up many different doors and windows for you, right? Like both on a personal and a professional and a career level, from kind of daring to think a little bit differently. This concept that we're really working on, it's kind of an uphill battle, is the vision that I've kind of come to form for it. It's really, we're working against natural resistance when it comes to correcting people's breathing, is kind of where it ends up, and also where your story kind of leads us to. Deeper than that, it's really like affecting the shape and the growth of people's jaws. And I think, like you said, most of it happens in early development. So most of it happens in childhood, and even like sort of in utero, and even pre-utero from some of the research that I've been looking at, and kind of this field of epigenetics and the way that we're really sort of like, to put it in simple words, it's almost like we're handed down like a bad hand of cards, right? We're sort of given a bad deal in many different ways. In other words, like we're not really set up, we're not really born into a world that facilitates our best growth, right? And like as a human being, but really from our perspective here, like you know, our actual the physical growth of our muscles, our bones, our tissues, our joints, things like that. So it gets me thinking. I'm trying to think of some of the numbers again. I mean, you kind of see these pop by all the time, and they're very, very disturbing, and also they're kind of confronting, but they're not necessarily as set in stone as it's sometimes made out to be either. So I think that the growth of the face and the jaw is kind of complete by age 21 or even by age 18, but really the most of it happens sort of in this area of like maybe age 1 to 6, and then age 6 to 9, and it also includes the way that the spine will develop, and really the way that we're kind of set up. And then, you know, the idea or the general sense is then after that, it's kind of a done deal, right? And like you said, with the woman that's sort of 25 years old, there isn't that much you can do. And I actually know that there is, so I want to get there later on into the chat as well. But really this idea that it's very hard. It's very hard. And a lot of us are learning these lessons quite later on now. There's been some amazing books that have come out, like Breath by James Nestor, and also a book called Jaws, and kind of a heap of different literature. And you sort of read this and you go, oh, well, that's messed up, because here I am, and myself, like so many of us, you know, and I don't know what the exact percentage is, but probably like most of us, like I had braces when I was a kid, you know what I mean? And my jaw isn't shaped exactly the way that I would like it to be, right? And so it does feel like I've been dealt a bad hand. And then that also goes to affect our breathing, because from what I can see, really what ends up happening is that our airways have become narrower, right? If I'm seeing that correctly. And so there's really not enough space for us to breathe the right way. And that then causes us to hold different positions. And again, it affects the way that our spine is shaped, and it all kind of trickles downhill from this early development. And like you said, it really begins with breastfeeding. So can you go a little bit more into that and maybe just see if I'm on the right track there with the way I've been laying it out?
Yeah. I mean, you went into a lot there. We hit on epigenetics, we hit on, you know, the jaw growth and everything in the airway, but breastfeeding, Yeah, I mean, basically, in a real nutshell, what happens is when the baby is on the breast, the nipple is able to be completely compressed. So if we look at an ultrasound where we can see through the soft tissues, and we see an ultrasound of a baby breastfeeding, you actually see the nipple completely compressing against the palate of the baby. So the
Mm-hmm.
nipple's in between the tongue, and then you got the palate up here, and the tongue's doing this, and compressing the nipple, compared to a bottle, whereas the nipple doesn't get compressed. And so when the bottle is sitting on top of the tongue just learns to thrust forwards while swallowing.
Yeah.
So we've got this. The other thing that's happening is the baby is. So we got this sort of pretty much a suck, swallow, breathe pattern. It's not quite as simple as that, but suck, swallow, breathe, and the baby is staying on the nipple and nose breathing while
Right.
feeding. And so it's learning that when it needs to breathe, neurologically, there's a pathway being set up
Yeah.
from the brain to the nose. Breathe, nose, 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 breathe.
Yeah.
That's it. And it learns that that's how it needs to breathe. And so it's also learning the correct muscle patterns as well. Whereas your listeners again can try it. If you stick your thumb in your mouth to simulate a bottle or to simulate thumb sucking, it sits on top of your tongue. And when you swallow, you'll actually feel your buccinators, which is your cheek muscles. Yeah. You'll feel those contracting.
Yeah.
And so when we introduce this other thing, that's bottle feeding, basically, it creates that pathway of the cheeks narrowing the jaws, and not allowing the jaws to grow out like this. And so, I mean, and we could go into a major sort of rabbit hole, because one of the cool things that you said was around, we're not really set up in our modern life to it's not handed to us on a plate kind of thing to have health. It used to be. So when we so we can talk a bit about epigenetics as well. So when we used to, back in the day, whenever we want to call it, let's just call it 2000 years ago, just for argument's sake. Or when we had tribes, when we lived in tribe, there would be several women in that tribe who have milk at any one time. And so even if the mother was tired and couldn't breastfeed the infant, the infant would be passed on to the mothers, and they would feed the baby, the sisters and the aunties and so on, while the mum went and had a rest. Whereas in our modern society, we've got this situation where, and I don't want to get into whether women should be in the home or out of the home. I'm just telling you what the facts are, the knock-on effects. So we've got women who, many of whom have to go out and work, either to just put food on the table because of our decisions that we make, like living in a bigger house or driving a faster car or whatever it might be, or just literally trying to make ends meet for many people, really, honestly. So they have to go out and work. And as a result of that, then the baby has to be passed on to someone else who hasn't got milk supply. So even if they can breastfeed, they're then passed a bottle. And then we get these changes in patterns of feeding going on. So that's just one thing. The environment that we're in as well is, it's, as you said before, it's a stressful environment. And when we get into that autonomic nervous system of that fight, flight, and so on, that also is increasing our respiratory drive and driving us towards opening our mouth, because to breathe more, we have to get the mouth open to be able to take that much air in, and it's, so those sorts of things are kind of slightly linked, like loosely. But yeah, epigenetics as well. I mean, I often make a bit of a joke, or I sort of say, look, if I was, there's a few things I would do if I was voted to be prime minister and was making all the laws.
Yeah.
One of them is I would make bottles a prescription item. So a baby could only get access to a bottle or a dummy if they had a specific problem.
Right.
And then while we work out what the problem is.
And that would include like a pacifier as well, right?
Definitely a pacifier, because at least a bottle you get in nutrition. A pacifier, you're not actually getting anything from it other than calming the baby down.
It's kind of a laziness in a sense. Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, so it could be used temporarily while we sort of work out what the problem is. So I would do that. I would make that a prescription item while we work out what the problem is, and then help this baby and help this mom out.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I often joke about, we could kind of reverse this epigenetic kind of thing, whereby we've got maybe about 3 or 4 generations at least of this dysfunction now. So you're sort of born with a bad hand, if you like. It's not quite genetics, but it's pretty much, given we're so far down that pathway. But imagine we set up this commune, right, where you couldn't leave the commune. It was all completely fresh water, fresh food, no chemicals to make us sick, which block our nose up and make us sick and make us mouth breathe. Everyone's, in this commune, it's like, it's really draconian. You like have to breastfeed, and like, it's like and you have to get the surgery if your tongue's not functioning properly, and you have to do all these different things.
Yeah.
And then
the
even
whole
when
community is involved in sort of facilitating getting babies on the right track straight away.
It's totally an unethical science thing I'm talking about here. But then you also, for the toddler, you would get them to even to, one problem is these jolly jumpers and the things that toddlers sort of bounce in, or
Mm-hmm.
the walking things, that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
set up proper pelvic and core, which is related to the breath. And the seat height that they sit on, the hips should be here and the knees here and the feet here, but you get toddlers sitting on these seats where their legs are dangling down. That affects core as well, and therefore breathing. And so there's all these different things that you could do in this commune, and you keep all these people locked in the commune for but it's a really happy commune, everyone's healthy
Mm-hmm.
and all the rest,
That would have
for
to be part of it as well. Yeah.
for 4 generations. And if you
And
do that, a guy called Francis Pottinger did it. He's
mm-hmm.
kind of the godfather of epigenetics, although he didn't coin the term epigenetics. He did an experiment on cats, and he followed them for 3 generations, feeding them denatured food. So cats should normally eat raw food in the wild.
Yeah.
And he fed these 3 or 4 generations of cats. I'm sure you know about this already, Johannes,
Mm-hmm.
but he fed it to them, and they basically got progressively more and more sick. And part of that was crooked teeth, but they basically got sick to the point where they couldn't have any more offspring.
Yeah.
In most of them couldn't, but the ones who could, he then reversed that and followed that for 3 generations of feeding them healthy food, like raw food, basically for cats. And he reversed it to the point where you couldn't tell that these individuals had been sick, and they look like wild cats again. And so that's the thing
It's
with
an incredible story, that one. And it got to the point where they actually became extinct as a species, essentially, right? Because they either had no will anymore, but basically they couldn't reproduce anymore. And the litters that were produced, they were stillborn. And so essentially within 4 generations of living like in an unnatural way, life was over. And it's great. But I think that the really beautiful thing that you touched on there, and you tell it so well, with the story of the utopian idea of the commune, but that it actually was also shown that it could reverse, right?
Mhm.
And I saw some really interesting data from someone that had kind of compiled. And essentially what it came down to was that we are indeed sitting at this 4th generational point, right? Just like the cats, where it took about 4 generations of like living away from the natural ways of the world to end up in this problematic situation. And when it came to breathing and development of the jaw, which was the way they measured it, I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was compiling a lot of data together and looking at it over the last century, and essentially saying that, yeah, we are now at this point where I think in the 1925 or something like that, it was like maybe 30% of people had like soft tissue dysfunction or, breathing affected, where their jaw hadn't grown properly. And then 1950s, it kind of boomed. And then 25 years ago, it was 80% of people. And now it is 90% people.
Yeah.
And the visual that I use within the course that I teach is like a mountain, right? And so that comes from the epigenetic landscape, where the way it's sort of depicted is that there's a ball rolling down a mountain, and it reaches different valleys and peaks. And that's really what life is, right? It's different there's different things in our environment, different things that happen that affect our life, essentially. And it's almost like skiing down a mountain and taking certain turns along the way, right? And again, we might not have been dealt a good hand being in this 4th generation, at least speaking for myself. But I think the cool thing about it is that there are things we can do, right? So there are steps we can take, and there are choices that we can still affect. And it is a little bit like pushing uphill. But the beauty and the motivation and the way you describe it as well is that really we're doing it for a better world, right? And really, not only we're doing it for a world in the first place, depending on how deep you want to sort of look into this, but people that aren't healthy can't create a healthy planet. Like it just doesn't work that way. You know what I mean? We can't be connected to the thing that gives us life, right? The air that we breathe, and ultimately what facilitates that. And I think that if you do look at that, last century, really, that's becoming very apparent that the more disconnected that we sort of live from nature, and the further we, it's interesting, everything we've discussed so far, right? Because what it almost seems like is that, as you sort of mentioned, that the life for women is very different these days, right? And then it has to be like, it's not something that's a choice for everyone. But then we create all these kind of blankets to mask that, right? And so interesting, like you're saying, and this is just a small example of a much bigger thing going on, but things like pacifiers and things like, all these different situations by which we can then facilitate that new world. But then I think what we're starting to happen now is the foundations being rocked a little bit, where it's kind of showing that it doesn't work. Like it doesn't really work. It can kind of temporarily mask what's going on, but not in the long term. So fascinating. Thank you so much for sort of delving in this with me. And I've learned so much from you over the last couple of years when it comes to this. And I would never have expected to be just so passionate about this, really. But it is just so interesting. And what it even feels like myself is that, breath is life. And the way that we breathe says so much about the way that we live. And it really, really does. And also, we can start talking about things like carbon dioxide and the capnometer and the different measurements that we can do. And then you and I both know that when you assess someone's breathing, you actually really get an interesting blueprint of how they live their lives. And then that process of working with someone on their breathing and, facilitating that kind of journey back to healthy, really, not even beyond, but just kind of restoring the natural flow and taking someone back to like a good baseline of health. It's fascinating because it shows you that everything is involved in facilitating that, right? Just like everything is involved in creating that healthy community. It is very, very holistic and everybody has to kind of play their part, but also within the organism, within the human initially, it really is like a very full picture that you have to work with. And I think that's why I'm so interested in breathing. I think that's why it's just helped me connect so many dots backwards in my life and also forwards. It's really presenting this new path now. And really, really, really excited about what's to come and the change that this can make. Because again, it may not be set up ideally for most of us, but there's a whole lot that we can do. Back to your story. So you started to go into a really, really interesting arena, which I definitely want to touch on as well. And essentially it's really cool actually that the person that you started working with said that you had to look at breathing. And so again, it kind of wasn't part of the natural train of thought there. It was something that you kind of had to think outside of the box to pursue. And you mentioned that you were struggling with sleep apnea yourself as well at the time. You can maybe tell us a little bit about Dan when he found breathing? And I actually know an image that you've shown me that I can still see it. It's like locked into my retina because it was just so extremely powerful. And it also really, really speaks to the work that can still be done. And I think for that reason alone, it's extremely inspiring. So I asked you to kind of bring it to the interview and maybe put it up on your screen today. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit and just tell us about Dan when he discovered all of this, and then tell us about what happened. And and that visual overview would be really powerful.
Yeah, cool. I'll bring it up. I'll tell the story a little bit first. So, I mean, basically, most people would have met me and thought I was an okay guy, and I was getting, I had a dental practice, and just my staff liked me. I had friends within the practice, and I was doing okay in the world and all the rest of it. But it really, I look at the photo of me from before all of this, and I see a different person. I almost don't feel connected to him. And a lot of things happened for me personally around that time. I would maybe describe it as a spiritual crisis, and maybe also not maybe just a personal life crisis as well as health crisis. And essentially, I was living every day in severe head and neck pain. And I was emotionally, if you'd met me, you'd think I was okay, but if there was any kind of conflict with me or anything that maybe I was much more judgmental than I am now. Essentially, I was walking around the world. Everything was black and white. Was the way I survived from being a young boy. And all this started for me, by the way, when I was a young boy, when my father passed away. My whole body kind of went into a tight kind of contraction, and I could no longer sit with my legs crossed in assembly at school, things like that. So there's a whole emotional response, which seems to then lead to other responses. But basically, I had sleep apnea. My wife would tell me that I was waking, gasping for air in the middle of the night, and I would have terrible sleep, headache, and so on. So I started doing some of this jaw treatment that I'd already delved down. I'd already gone down that rabbit hole. And the jaw treatment that I did was to wear this thing in my mouth 24/7, even including eating, kissing my wife, consulting with patient, everything. I wore this piece of plastic in my mouth, and at nighttime, when I would to decompress my jaw joint, basically, and at nighttime I would take it out, keep my jaw open so that my jaw didn't overclose again, because my problem is my jaw was overclosing. I would keep my jaw open, and then I would brush my teeth without bringing my teeth together, and then I would put the nighttime version of this thing in, which helped me to keep my jaw open while I was asleep at night as well. And for me, it was around about, I think, 9 to 12 months. My teeth didn't come together once for 9 to 12 months, not once. And that allowed my jaw joint to remodel itself and to heal, because it was all completely worn down on the x-ray. It's completely all gnarly and everything. So that got me out of my pain, my actual, the felt pain. And it maybe helped my sleep a little bit, but my sleep apnea didn't help. that didn't get corrected. And that was when I came across the Buteyko method, when my sleep apnea helped me. Now, I mentioned before that I was really judgmental, and what that looked like, is if someone cut me up in traffic, I would literally like drive up alongside them, roll the window down, and I would say, "Hey, mate, you just nearly killed us just then," kind of thing. And I remember having an argument with my wife because she was sitting there, and I pulled up to this guy, and I'm like, "You just nearly killed us, man. What are you doing?" And in my mind, it was like, I have to try and save the world. I have to tell him about this, because if I don't tell him about this, he's going to kill someone eventually, and blah blah blah. But actually, it was me projecting my own pain onto the world.
Wow.
And that was, so I was just a very stressed out guy without realizing it. And I was self-righteous and all the rest of it. I'm speaking to this because my experience of running a TMJ practice for about 3 or 4 years and basically working on patients who are in severe head and neck pain is that many of those people appear to be extremely unreasonable nearly all of the time. And that's what happens for people when they're in pain all of the time. They just, it's a natural human response. You get kind of irritable and whatever. And so that was me. And then I came across the Buteyko method. I started sleeping better, and that sort of helped me to improve a little bit. That then helped me to open my eyes and become more open to other things. And that's when I then came across nutrition and other elements of lifestyle, and started going to nutritional conferences and conferences where holistic doctors were attending and so on. And then I changed what I was eating, and that then got rid of the bloating in my stomach. And then after that, then I was able to start looking at my emotional health and my self-awareness and there would be no way that I could have got through my marriage crisis, which was the personal crisis that I had, if I was still sleeping badly, in pain, bloated stomach, etc., etc. And I feel for me, it all just happened in the perfect kind of order so that I could then deal with the next thing. And that then kind of led me towards where I am now. But that was like 10 years ago now. I'll maybe show you the picture. You can see the pictures of.
Please, yeah.
Let me share my screen. Where are we? Let's see. Share screen. Yeah. So this is me. This is previous me, basically.
Really unrecognizable.
Yeah, and I'm still not symmetrical in my face, and I'm still. If I take my headphones off in a minute, you'll see that one ear is slightly more out than the other. That's actually
that's what stands out as well, is that the one side sort of.
Yeah. So you can see that specifically on that left side, I look like I'm not alive. Like left side as in my face, left side, right side screen. I look like I'm not alive there, and I didn't feel like I was alive either. That was me at age, I think maybe 31. My ear is still like that. You'll see now. Well, maybe not as much actually, but this one. The ear sticks out still a little bit, but that's a rotated temporal bone. And that's all to do with because the ear sits on the temporal bone. And that's all to do with how my face grew as a child, very asymmetrical and dysfunctional. And you can see the scar on my chin there. That was actually where I fell over and hit my chin. And that really tipped my jaw problems into a worse situation. And if you then you fast forward to straight away after all of this treatment that I'm talking about, and you can see that the life has come. I mean, this is obviously it's a more professional photograph. This first one here was just taken in a basic dental practice, and this was taken somewhere else. So the light is better and everything else. But I'm pretty sure you can.
Eyes don't lie.
Yeah, exactly. You can see the light in my face there, and that was not years later. So yeah, and I do identify with that guy. That was I still hadn't gone through my personal kind of awareness stage, but that was when I was feeling healthy and I had energy. So yeah, that's it. Shall I take that off now, Johannes?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. It leaves me a little bit speechless, even though I've seen it before, and to hear you speak so openly, so honestly about what you were going through. So many things running through my mind, but I think that what you said really was, it was as if it all came together perfectly over time, right? And it just reminds me of being a guide in life, right? Working in the space of health, it's all we can do is guide people from time to time and giving people little nuggets potentially. Because I think you sort of spoke to it yourself without saying it. But if someone would have told you that you had to, change your diet or look at this, in some of those early stages, it could have gone very wrong even, but it literally would not have landed. And so I think what you spoke so beautifully to also is pain, right? And the fact that people are in pain, right? Be it physical or emotional. And that what I'm really getting from this is like those beautiful people are not themselves, And if anything, it just fills up my, my empathy bucket, which, and compassion, which as a guide, it's kind of what we run on, right? It's the kind of fuel that goes the distance in this type of work. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're
Thank you for
welcome. And
sharing.
you're very welcome. And just to what you spoke to there, I was actually also feeling and thinking along those lines when just even before you said that was that you can't give as someone who's going to maybe if you're some of your students are going to go into coaching,
Hmm.
it's this idea of not giving people everything all at once. It's like
Yeah.
give them something little to do and then let tick that box and feel a little bit better and then give them the next piece. And there's not always a right order of doing that
No.
in, but it's kind of it's overwhelm. I've overwhelmed a lot of people, and they just haven't done it. They've just gone into like freeze mode, and I haven't experienced that much in my own life freeze mode, but I've recently. That was when things happened with my job and so on. And I now know what freeze mode is like, and it's literally like you just walk into a room and you don't even know why you're there, and it's like
Yeah.
what am I here for? And it's just like complete procrastination and overwhelm. And so,
Yeah, it's
you
beyond
know,
you are not yourself. It's really you are not you.
yeah,
Um, you're not
yeah.
there.
Yeah. So it's just little baby steps and just kind of, and then celebrate the wins along the way, and don't expect to kind of reverse this whole epigenetic thing that we're talking about, immediately. And in fact, don't even expect to fully reverse it.
Hmm.
I'm never going to have that, that I can't think what exactly your joy, Johannes, but mine is very underdeveloped too. And my beard kind of hides it. But, this bit here needed to have grown much further forwards, really
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
And I'm never going to get that unless I have surgery and a whole bunch of work that would take years and years. And do I need to do that to be healthy? No. But I'm never going to be perfect. But it's about being functional and happy and thriving in the world.
And I think a big part of that is, being of service and having this kind of vehicle to tell your story through. It really is what that often ends up being. And
Mm.
I for one feel so blessed that you have been on that journey, right? Because you've been able to kind of guide me along the initial steps of seeing things a bit further. And I know that you've spoken to many um about this, and it kind of begs the question of like, would you have been able to do that if you did not, if if this perfectly unique hand of cards had not been dealt to you? And I'm sure it wasn't pretty at times, right? And I'm sure that the hardship, it's hard to kind of see it from that perspective of it outweigh, like, the results outweighing the bad. But yeah, like I said, I'm grateful to have met you, and that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for all of this. So that's one light
Yeah.
brought to the world because of your story. And thank you for being so open and sharing it. It's courageous.
Yeah, you're welcome. And as you know, we have a mutual appreciation society going on here, and I feel the same way. And you about yourself, and we spoke earlier about, or you spoke as well about getting into nature and kind of getting back to the self
Hmm.
as well. And that's been my experience, particularly on some of the things that I've been involved with you, is just that getting out into nature and how that can, you could sit as a coach for someone for weeks telling them they need to do this certain things for their health. Just take them out into nature and let them have a felt experience of a certain amount of energy that can come from being in a group of people who are all supporting each other in community. And nature, you add that into the mix, and it's like bang, it can just flick a switch for some people. It has done
Yeah.
for me. And I really want to honor and acknowledge and appreciate those experiences that you've given me as well. This is how community, and I believe the future that we're heading towards is much more based on community and collaboration and being there for each other in this kind of a way.
Yeah, I'm very
Yeah,
optimistic in that
yeah,
sense as well.
yeah,
And it's the world that I'm creating.
yeah,
Whether everybody's
totally.
going to live in it, I don't know. But
Yeah, well, I'll live in it, and
there's
yeah,
certainly
for
space
sure.
for me and
Yeah,
my loved ones. Yeah. And I think if we
yeah,
all adopt that mentality, then hopefully we can pull each other along.
yeah.
That kind of brings me, I'm just laughing here because I'm looking at your journey almost on the timeline, and it's almost like you never get to settle. So you set up as a dentist, and then new kind of realization opens. And I think that's really, it speaks to that hero's journey cycle, right? Where the universe brings you a call, right? It gives you an invitation to see something a little deeper, a truth that, a new world. And people need to answer the call, right? That's a big step. And sometimes you don't have a choice, but yeah, I think in many cases you do to a certain extent. And so this new cycle, the way I'm seeing it now, and you're lecturing, you're teaching around the world, and then here's another call, the world of breathing. And then the Buteyko technique and becoming very influential on that and integrating it with, with your breathing practices and all the, you have a business that also creates, and you've invented a form of mouth tape, and there's so many different storylines we can go across here. And I can imagine that you sort of land in a new settlement there. And that's actually when we met. And, from having kind of stepped into the journey myself at that point, I know that you again kind of had to answer the call. And so could you tell us a little bit about kind of when we were first met, and also like as a breathing practitioner, because it is really quite interesting.
Yeah.
There is so much change that's happening and it's going on. And again, not everybody is answering those calls. Not everyone is willing to sort of, and it's not that they have to, but everyone's kind of willing to look at the different movements that are happening, and things are moving and developing very, very quickly. It's very hard to keep your finger on the pulse.
Yeah, look, I've really enjoyed this talk so far, Johannes, and what I've just noticed is my energy just kind of like raised a little bit more even just now, just kind of going back to that when we first met and asking that question. Really interesting, again, just about being open-minded. So I'd seen all the Wim Hof stuff and watched it, and I was really intrigued by the ice bath side of things and the cold exposure. I was very interested in that and not skeptical at all about it, and thought, yeah, there's something in that, this breathwork thing that people were doing and that Wim Hof was introducing or, bringing back to the world. I was really skeptical about it because this Buteyko technique that I've got kids and adults off their lifetime of medication for asthma.
Yeah.
I've got, myself with sleep apnea and other people with sleep apnea. I've done all these things with the Buteyko technique, which essentially is really boring to do, but actually looks like you're not breathing. You're breathing so gently. And the problem that we've sort of alluded to a little bit in society is this, what we call habitual hyperventilation, which is that your nervous system is so bombarded on such a regular basis that your normal breathing pattern becomes slightly breathing too much, which then can lead to this mouth breathing thing. So I've done this Buteyko technique, which helps to reverse that problem by practicing breathing very, very lightly in a certain way over a long period of time. Very, very boring to watch. I mean, watching it just looks like someone sitting still doing nothing. So I thought, I'm going to go along to this thing and see what this guy's doing. It was half an hour from where I was living at the time on the Gold Coast. And I went with my wife, and we paid our money and went along for this workshop. And I thought, I'm going to talk to this guy afterwards, because I really think what they're doing is harming people, and it's not a good idea. I went along, and you see, if this is the new me, it's not the old me that was really judgmental. So I actually had to experience it, right? So I went along, but I was skeptical. But like, I need to experience this to know what it's like. I can't just use my mind and decide it's bad.
And this was a breath and ice workshop.
Correct.
Maybe 4 years ago now.
Probably, yeah, about around 3 or 4 years ago. And I did the breathwork thing, and I fully got into it and listened to the science behind it, which Johannes presented so beautifully. And I thought, yeah, well, everything you said so far makes sense from a biochemical point of view. Did the workshop, and had an amazing experience where at one point I was crying and felt like a little boy who'd been held down against my will, which I don't remember ever having done, but metaphorically, I've been held down against my will many times. Yeah. And I had this crying release, body shakes, release, and so on, which was actually quite pleasant, even though it was crying. And then I went into fits of laughter, and I thought, shit, that was amazing, really, really cool. Then we did the physiology on the ice bath stuff, did that, felt amazing, as everyone usually does, and had great energy for the rest of the day. And then got home and thought, shit, I'm going to practice this for a while and see what happens. And I did. And life got better and better and better. And then I went down the pathway of did the Wim Hof stuff online, and then even went to the Wim Hof Academy and did a bit of stuff over there in LA. I didn't fully get qualified because of the restrictions in getting to Poland. But, as part of that journey, I kept in touch with Johannes. But I was ready at the end of that workshop prior to it to go over to him and pretty much take him down with all of my special knowledge that's up here and my experience. And afterwards, I just thought, wow, this is amazing, and so it's that thing about being open-minded and where that can lead to. And both saying yes and saying no can open new doors. So if it's no, it's kind of like, this is my boundary and I'm going to say no, which I've done recently. And it's shut down certain areas of life for me, but opened up these other amazing, beautiful things, which is where I'm heading now. And then at the same time, saying yes to all this stuff that Johannes was presenting. And I remember phoning him up, just saying, look, if I can be involved in your stuff, just in any way, shape or form, let me know, because that was so bloody cool. And, and this is where we are now, and there are so many other stories I could share, but.
No, yeah, we've climbed a few mountains now. And it speaks to an amazing, I think, like an underlying current that really drives, it drives most of us. It drives our pain, our joy, this driving force that we sometimes connect to, right? And part of that also is, I think, as you mentioned, it's kind of a taste for adventure, but it's more than that. It's a taste for like human connection and sort of genuine interaction. And I think, I myself have been on a little bit of a health journey, maybe over the last 5 to 10 years, sort of looking at different things in my life that happened and different situations and different techniques and processes and methods, and going down all the different rabbit holes. Like, often I think when we take the own reins of our health, that's a really big pivotal moment, right? And then there's not much direction there about where to go, and we sort of just have to try it all, right? Whether it's going into some of the diet extremes or trying different cleanses and techniques and processes and things like that. But where I was trying to get to, I think what I see quite clearly now in my mind, and what this conversation sort of reminds me of underneath, is like, yes, we have amazing knowledge, and but there is amazing knowledge in the world, right? And there's people that have access to it, and they can share it in a beautiful way, and it can act as an incredible intervention, and it can really kickstart someone's process there, right? Or it can guide them when they've got a little bit stuck. There's also something deeper, right? And that to me really represents that getting together, that human living. And maybe it's, ultimately kind of the far end of the spectrum of it is the commune, right? Although it's been tried by a few people and usually like not with much success. There need to be some boundaries in place when going on that journey.
Yeah.
But it's that way of living that's perhaps just closer to the natural way. And maybe it is really just, it's not nothing new. It's not revolutionary. It's just getting back to that way that people would interact 2000 years ago, right? When you were closer to other people, and when significant traumas did happen, right? Albeit physical, emotional, spiritual crises and things like that. There was a close group of people. There was a lot of empathetic witnesses to that. And there was this like collective, perhaps healing or holding that would happen. And I think, some of the work that we've done in taking people into the mountains and even taking large groups of men on these kind of, very physical, but also kind of spiritual discoveries, right? Where we spent 3-4 days hiking and swimming in frozen lakes and doing, big saunas and other things like that, holding our breaths for long periods of time, just really like touching these very, 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 very like fundamental points of life, right? These very like these triggers that can actually make a very big change in a very short period of time. It's really special, and we can understand it. We can sort of analyze it to a certain extent, but there's also a very big part of it that we just don't get. You know what I mean? And that's beautiful. We don't sort of have to understand. Yeah. Great. Great journey still unfolding. Very, very much so. And along the way, I've joined your program as well, which was the Breath Coach program. And it was really cool deepening for me because, I, like so many others, kind of stumbled upon the Wim Hof method. This is maybe about 5 years ago now. And it had such a big impact on me too. Where I laid back and did the breathing exercise and just touched something that was dormant within. But it didn't really have an access point to that, whatever that is, right? Is it stillness? Is it acceptance? Is it the parasympathetic nervous system? Who knows exactly what it is, right? And then just searching and searching and searching about how does it work? And unfortunately, Wim doesn't have the answers. He's perhaps got the ways, right? He's got the way of living that is very, very close to that. That's probably been the kind of biggest inspiration of that kind of big 3-year journey that I went on in that technique and things like that. But not the answers. And so to continue looking is kind of ultimately led me back to where this conversation began, is like, if you follow the threads long enough and you're willing to kind of find guides and teachers and mentors along the way, it's the story of man, right? And it's the story of civilization, of society, and of really like how we live and how we breathe. And breathing just happens to be this like very, very, very fundamental function that's been so overlooked, which is like one of the reasons why this is so interesting, right? It's something very different than diet and exercise and these kind of things that most of us are aware of, is that the power that breathing can have and changing your breathing can have. And so ending up with this realization that most of us need to work on our breathing a little bit. And the good thing is that's no longer new agey. We're kind of still riding this wave now of awareness where people are starting to realize like, it's actually becoming kind of cool and kind of accepted that, you need to work on your breathing a bit to live a happy, full life, right? There needs to be a little bit of awareness brought to it. And it's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's just the way it is. It's just to combat the ways of the modern world. Right? And that's really what we get to guide people in, is we get to guide them in the process of, okay, let's look in your breathing. And maybe it looks like doing one of those breakthrough sessions where you basically like take someone home in their nervous system, right? And you give them this big experience that just might open up this journey for them, right? Like it did for you and me and for so many others. And then maybe you're looking at them, quite specifically, and you're sort of working on symptoms initially. And then, the cool thing I think is that all of them kind of lead in the same direction, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And what I've really found out, and what I'd like to kind of get your feel on a little bit as well, because I'm seeing this more and more now, having this opportunity of, through the workshops and things, with the guide, 5,000 people for these breathwork sessions, and now also instructors and teaching other people to kind of see and look at breathing on such a deep level, right? And I'm still very new in this space, but I'm all in. And the thing that fascinates me the most is that, again, breath is life, and it sounds kind of cliche, but it's not, because what ultimately drives your breathing is your life, right? And what drives, your respiration is your nervous system, right? And that's the way that we kind of interact with the world around us. And so from that perspective, looking at how you breathe is looking at how you live. And when you come to that point, right, when you somehow follow that thread of, you've been lucky enough to kind of meet someone that guides you with that, if you picked up a book or whatever, you watched a YouTube video, it begs this interesting question of like, what is it in my life that is causing me to breathe this way?
Yeah.
Maybe it's something a long time ago, but oftentimes it's also factors that are still kind of around today that are keeping us, let's say, for lack of better terms, keeping us in a state of stress, right? They're keeping us wound up, a bit tense, and they're kind of creating this way of living, this way of interacting with the world that our breathing is very much related to. And so changing our breathing as a very direct access point to kind of start unwinding some of that. But really, it also just makes us so aware, because you can't change your breathing if you don't change your life.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I ended up now. And this is where I'm just so fascinated by, is like, right?
Yeah.
And to kind of asking some of those bigger questions. It's not just looking at what's going on with physiology, but what's your relationship like, right? Tell me a bit about your diet. And what are some of these things that stress you out? Maybe it's your posture, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you're drinking a bit too much coffee there. You're probably, most of us are, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to stop talking now, but I'd love to kind of get your view on that. And maybe it's, philosophical, maybe it's very practical, but when working with someone on their breathing and integrating lifestyle into that, what are some of the considerations that you make? And you've spoken to something really big already, which is going really slow, right? So going really one step at a time. There's some other things that from, over a decade of practice, you've kind of found to be true.
Oh man, you said so much stuff there that was really, really sort of on point, and stuff that I was like, oh, that's a really cool thing to speak about. And so, if I can just touch on something you said maybe a few minutes ago, first is that, a quote that came to me, I can't remember where it came from, but it's wisdom comes from experience. I can't remember who said that. And so it's this idea of experiencing something first, and then having the felt wisdom that comes from that, as opposed to knowing about it or reading it in a book. And this will circle back to answer your final question as well. And so there's this, I feel like in society now, there's this kind of, you're either right or wrong, whether it's Facebook or it's whatever, it's either you like it or you don't like it, or, there's this kind of almost like a need for many people to have everyone agree with them. Otherwise they're their enemy, as opposed to just going, oh yeah, you think like that, I think like this. We can still sit in the same room and be happy with each other. And all the algorithms and all the rest of it does all that to us, right? So there's this kind of, one of the things that I like to make sure that people are aware of when my clients is that, every technique doesn't, just because it works really well for 90% of people, it doesn't work in the same way for the other 10% of people. And so while a guy down the road may have tried my thing and gone home after day one of a 4-day program and had like a life-changing like sleep, wakes up and just feels like he wants to run a marathon, the guy sitting next to him in the exact same class doing the exact same thing, that might take him 3 months to experience that.
Yeah.
And so it's to be open-minded about all of these things, and actually sort of not have an expectation that, that first session that I had with you where I went from crying to laughing. Well, the next time I did it, I didn't have the same experience. I did have a massive crying release about 6 months later when I'd just been doing it and doing it and doing it. But, it's this kind of, I feel like we've gone too much down. I don't even want to use the word science actually, because actually science is beautiful. We've gone too much down this kind of pathway of like, well, it has to be this way, otherwise it's definitely not that, and it must be this. Whereas science is, it's observation, and it's discussion, and it's things can be different, and it doesn't have to always be a certain way. So I think that's an important thing with my clients is I set up the expectations at the start around, what are you expecting from this? and making it clear to them that their expectations may be exceeded from day one, or it might take quite a while of dedication to actually get any of those expectations met. And some of the expectations might be highly unreasonable, because unless you're going to do all of the other things that you just mentioned, like the coffee, the this, the that, and the other, they're all the inputs that are creating the breathing problem. If we're working down here on the breath's here, and the symptoms are kind of here coming off the breath. If we're working here on the breath, we can have an immediate effect often on the symptoms in a nice way. But if you've got all these little inputs, if you're banging your head against a brick wall up here, well, you're constantly winding the breath up. So you know, it's kind of like it's for them to know that the breath has got like that because there's a whole bunch of inputs in our society or in your life, and you have to be, there's a self-reliance that needs to happen, and a self-responsibility for health. And I will guide you, but I can only do so much. You've got to do the work, and then we've got to look at all this other stuff on top, and just take one step at a time on that, you know? So it's important that they realize the breath isn't the actual cause. The cause is whatever caused the breath to be the problem.
Yes.
You know? So yeah. And
I think that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
And I've gone to witness this now in the, you know, the small number of people that I've kind of had the opportunity to guide in this quite intimate way, is that it really does work like a band that you gently ask to stretch, right? And for some people, it's, you know, the first night they wear the mouth tape, for example, it's like, wow, revolutionary. And for some people, that was horrible. I'm never doing that again. And what they just need to hear is like, stick with it for 7 days, because your body will get used to it, right? And so it's very, very hard to know where to meet people initially. And also, I think speaking to or kind of, and even maybe it's just in us as guides, it's like having this little bit of because we can also take that on ourselves, right? It's like, oh, that person didn't have the breakthrough experience, so I underperformed. Right. That's another kind of a loop. That's an interesting one to go down. Or, you know, it didn't quite work for them. Maybe I didn't explain it right. Maybe it just wasn't the right time for them to hear it, you know, and who knows? Who knows what they ate that morning? You know what I mean? Everything has an impact on it. But the concept of the band of like sort of gently nudging and you know, over time, you can then kind of like increase that tension that it can hold. But there's also a lot of bounce back that happens. And, yeah, also really interesting finding that in the first couple of days. It's like, wow. And then it's like, and that's part of it. And it's part of that kind of process that we go on. And yeah, it's actually quite I mean, it's a really honorable step for people to take, to be willing to look at their breathing, because as I've been trying to say, it's a willingness to look at your life. And it can be confronting, and yeah, it can even be disheartening at times. And it can really require some very, very some honest inquiry into what is driving my breathing, right? And some of it are bigger things, like we've discussed. And this has been so beautiful about kind of just coming in and mixing and marrying everything that I've learned along the way. And, you know, having my own approach, which is sometimes, very different than what's been done before. And having these interesting experiences of taking someone out to the mountains for a whole weekend and putting them under extreme pressure, you know, putting them completely out of their comfort zone and literally breaking them down in certain ways, but then also providing that safety and that sort of support and that kind of man-to-man chat that was sometimes required, or man-to-woman. And then for some reason that fixed their breathing, you know what I mean? Or that provided that breakthrough where they were stretching that band and it just wasn't really going anywhere. And then they boom, you know, and the same with the breakthrough experience where it was, you know, trying the gentle, soft approach of breathing softly and slowly and making the lifestyle changes, and it's not really working, and then laying someone down and breathing them into another world. And all of a sudden they've crossed some sort of imaginary threshold, not imaginary, but elusive, not physical, not measurable point, right?
Yeah.
That makes change.
I mean, one of the things that you briefly spoke to earlier was around sort of connection to nature and those sorts of things, which got me thinking about, you know, I'm into the archetypes and all that sort of thing. And it got me into those Jungian archetypes of the magician, which is connection to something greater than self. And, you know, that kind of way of being and living. And, you know, like you say, you could have someone who's maybe it's an emotional thing, an unresolved emotional thing. They were, you know, if you don't mind me using your example, you know, you know, as a young boy, put into the cold, right? And if, that would have been a emotional trigger and a kind of a like this to the body, right? And you've got this emotional unresolved thing, not you now, but if someone's got an unresolved something in the past they're not even aware of, and that's the thing that's kind of like you said, that your breath is a reflection of how you are right now. Well, that's there and it's hidden under the surface, and it's giving this habitual hyperventilation all day long. But you're almost doing this paradox when you go into the kind of breath work, like a Wim Hof sort of style, kind of hyperventilatory style of breath work. It's a paradox because you're asking them to breathe more, which is actually a kind of a stress response normally, and it is a stress response, but you're taking them into this otherworldly place where maybe somehow they let that unresolved, whether you call it a cellular memory or whatever you want to call it, but it's an unresolved, unmet boy or girl inside of them just gets kind of
in the tissue,
just gets seen, right? And felt and acknowledged or whatever it is. Then that little stress that's lying there the whole time from having done this crazy breath work is released. And then maybe that's one of the things that's then gone. And then they can start breathing more calmly and gently in normal life when they're not kind of, maybe maybe they're already eating healthily and they're doing everything else, but there's this little unmet thing that's inside of them and you just kind of go poof and it's gone, or remember these times when we've got the men and we all end up, this hugging, like there's like 50 men all in this big circle of hugs and the man in the middle is just completely broken down and shaking, but he's been witnessed and seen. And then maybe he just gets to go, oh, and it's just like, and it just comes down, so yeah,
it sits under the surface. It's hard to pick up on. I think with experience and learning to sort of work a bit more somatically, you can start to see patterns and things like that. But the results are tangible. They're perhaps not measurable, on a machine, although you could go in some ways that, they could be, what I mean? Someone's heart rate variability might actually change because, but I mean, it's basic things like just the level of sympathetic tension that they hold in the muscles of the throat and the jaw and the traps and to the eyes, like eyes don't lie, you can see things and you can see things moving and changing. And we've created a really interesting model, at Breathless, where we're marrying all these different styles, and we don't necessarily speak to the kind of techniques as much, although we have a library of techniques. We have a whole bunch of different ones that you can kind of use and apply. But the art of the facilitator that we try to encourage is that you actually remain flexible, so you don't get hung up about, this is how it should be. And I think what you learn very quickly as well is that anyone that sort of is like, this is the magic daily protocol, it just doesn't work like that. Like anyone that says that, you either got something to sell or you haven't quite explored it to this depth where you understand that it's actually very limiting for the person. And so as a practitioner, the art is really to have a wide, expansive toolkit. But we do start at the start. And that's, one thing I'm so grateful to have you in my life for, is having that guidance along those lines. And can't wait to have you come into Breathless more as well and sort of develop this further with us, because that's the other thing, is remaining super adaptive and super open. And if anything, that's the big part of this conversation, right? It's like knowing that we don't yet know, and knowing that there's so many breakthrough experiences for us still to have and to integrate. But it's beautiful having a vehicle where when those things come, we'll blend them right in, baby. You know what I mean? And it's a very direct transmission, which is, of course, the gift of being a teacher in life, is that your own work becomes the work of the world. But it's quite fascinating to have a wide view when it comes to breathing, and start with this approach of, breath is life, and look at the origins and go down the track and understand that, for someone to really reach their fullest potential as a human and to really kind of like be the best they can be so that they can go out into the world and give that back, most likely we're going to have to look at it from many different angles, As you mentioned, there's a very, very good chance that someone that does have that kind of wound up jaw and that pattern of mouth breathing and the sleep's not correct, like the data is very, very clear that if that's happening, the brain is not working to its fullest capacity, right? It's as simple as it is. And there's just more of a sympathetic drive. And again, it's like we're less ourselves, right? So working on it, but then also coming in and, working on being creative with your breathing and creating different flows and different structures around it. And also approaching it from this, it's not a spiritual side, but it's a deeper side. And it's really a deeper side of learning to read symptoms, kind of as you mentioned. And this is another very, very interesting kind of loophole to go down. But the fact that people have gone through an asthma attack, both by leaning into it, right? And excessively over breathing. So essentially following what the body is subtly telling them to do. And also by learning to restore the biochemistry themselves and slowing their breathing down, which is also what the body is telling them to do.
Mhm.
Right. And it's like, is one of them right or wrong? I mean, it absolutely isn't, right? It's really creating the space from the awareness to read those signals and then having different ways of tuning
Yeah,
into it. And I mean, being a teacher is an art, and it is a
yeah.
very, very humble service to kind of walk in the world. And it's something that we have to always keep learning ourselves, right? That's the kind of underlying message to be open here. And you do that in a very, very inspiring way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's another. It's what you're describing there is flexible facilitation, and it's
Mhm,
like, and it's having it's like a great artist has a whole bunch of different tools and paints
mhm,
and brushes and all kinds of different things to apply the paint with, and it's what's required in this moment, you know, and that's what you're teaching, which is so I honor that because it's if you want to, if sometimes it's hard to sell something as you said, or make a franchise or whatever.
mhm.
There's all these constrictions. It
Yeah.
has to
Yeah.
be this way. And actually, you know, it's really if you what you're teaching is just a smorgasbord of different things. And then it's like, well, what do we need for this person for this moment in time? And sometimes you choose the not the wrong thing, but you go, oh, it's not quite working. Let's add this in and tweak it here or whatever. And
Yeah.
you know, that's it. That's what it's all about. It's having the humility to go, well, this isn't working right now. Let's do this instead. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And part of what we're developing currently is, relationships with other people in the industry and relevant practitioners and things like that. So I
Mm.
think before we close, I would like to ask for one of the things I want to ask you about that. We're going to have many of these chats, and
Cool.
hopefully record them and kind of bring them to transmit it somehow. But one of the things I have been kind of very keen to ask you more about is when people do realize and when people do start researching that, the jaw wasn't necessarily the shape that it could have been, right? That growth didn't quite reach their full potential in that sense. What are some of the things people can look at these days? And I think it's really pointing people in the direction of a guide, right? And so
Yeah.
maybe it starts there, but maybe there's also some things that people can sort of do at home
Yeah.
themselves for starters, or they can kind of start bringing in.
Yeah, well, look, as an adult, it's as you said before, the jaw growth is pretty much over by about age 18 to 21, and most of it's done by age 6. But there are a lot that you can do to, like, for example, if you have jaw pain or whatever, you know, you're not going to be able to grow your jaw and change that so easily just by yourself at home. But there's orofacial myofunctional therapy, which is muscle exercises for the tongue,
Yeah.
lips, and cheeks, and breath work as well to help with the muscle factors with all of that to improve why it got there in the first place. And sometimes just doing that alone will help put less pressure on the jaws and help to just kind of loosen things out a little bit. So that's something that can be done. And then there's a whole bunch of other things that you can get hold of online. There's something called a munchie, Munchee, which can be bought online. They have a website for that. I know the owner of that company. She's based in Newcastle. I should introduce you at some point. You'd like to have a chat with Mary,
Okay,
I'm sure.
yeah, I forgot.
Yeah,
Big community in Newcastle.
yeah. And she's a chiropractor, and her dad was a dentist, and he invented this appliance. So that you can get hold of those online, and there's various things you can do with them. It's a long conversation, but it's certainly those things you can do. And then just it's like the sleep hygiene type stuff, you know. It's like just all that stuff that you would go through, like, you know, don't take on fluids straight before bed, or that's what I would say anyway. I don't want to drive the respiratory system to have to do any work during sleep. You want them to just sleep and not have to digest during sleep. And then lights out and no technology after dark and all those different things to get the melatonin happening and, you know, things like that. So yeah, I don't know whether that answers your question, but we could talk more about orofacial myofunctional therapy at some point for sure. And you know, we can talk more about that maybe, but yeah, it's a big topic.
It's a huge topic. Well, let's leave that in the cards and leave people hanging a little
Yeah,
bit, leave them wanting
yeah,
more.
yeah.
So if people want to connect to you or find you, and I guess on that note, with sharing your story, a kind of we never know, but what direction are you currently heading to? And is there a place for people to connect with you on that journey, or what is in the cards for you?
Well, from the breath side of things, I do a lot of things like this sort of talk and for other people at the moment, and also clinic that I have in Melbourne that I haven't been able to work at in for quite a while with my business partner there. We do sort of professional lectures and so on. And then I have my own thing, which is breathehealthretreats.com, and you can look at that online. Right now, I've shut down a lot of the events that I was doing with the men's work stuff. I do local men's groups for free in my community here. But as far as that work goes, really my focus right now is actually on building a community that can potentially exist outside of the system. So it's like there's a community of 130 of us where within this community, there's doctors, dentists, nurses, plumbers, electricians, every teachers, every kind of profession you can imagine. Because of the restrictions that we've got in our country at the moment, we're just kind of going, okay, we're not going to fight that system over there. We're having this way of kind of, if my pipe breaks, the plumber will come, or if he has a dental emergency, I will help him with mobile dental equipment, for example. So, so it's kind of no money's exchanged, no taxes paid. It's just like, it's a community of people supporting each other with food security, water security, and just general kind of community support. So that's where my focus is right now, is actually kind of finding a way of not having to fight against anything, because I can't work as a dentist at the moment because of the mandates since August. So yeah, that's really where I'm at. And then I do a lot of stuff that's free with the rites of passage stuff. And really, I just put my hand up to be a part of the things that we've discussed. And I'm in a fortunate situation in my stage in my life right now where, I can be a bit flexible along those lines and just get involved in community. Is like the three words that are kind of in my space right now is community, discernment. So being careful with what I do and say, and also patience, and just kind of not, because I went through a big struggle with all the stuff that's going on in the world, and I've come through that. You supported me through that as well, and and thank you for that, by the way. And it's just, that's where I'm at. So I don't know whether I'll ever do dentistry again, and that's okay. Like, I've got to that point where that's okay, and hopefully I will, but I'll do it in this other community where I'll just be called a guy who knows how to use mobile dental equipment for emergencies, as opposed to a dentist. Because if I'm not registered, I can't do that, So we'll see. Yeah.
I mean, you shared with us, the vision of the utopian creation that could be. So maybe this is part of the part that you will play in it, which is really quite amazing. I imagine that, in the community, if someone does call upon you as a dentist, I couldn't think of a better person to show up and provide them just like a very honest and non-biased, and maybe it helps flipping back all those titles, because it allows for that, right? It allows for that sort of view of like, well, this is what's going on. I won't make any money if I pull you in this direction or this direction. This is what I think, based upon a lifetime of inquiry. Yeah. So thank you for being there for a lifetime of inquiry, and also being part of the Breathless community. And we're gonna have many more conversations, and I kind of can't wait for you to meet everybody, and join the training coming up, and super exciting. So
looking forward to it.
It's been an awesome conversation as always, and I'm so glad. I feel so blessed to call you a friend and a teacher, and here's to many more.
And I feel so blessed to call you a friend and a teacher as well. So it's a mutual appreciation society, as I said before.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you very much, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thank you very much.